Hello and welcome to this short course about how to support teens who are struggling with anxiety. The reason why I've talked about how you can help teens to help themselves in the title of this course is because I think it's really important that as children reach adolescence and go beyond, that we start thinking about what are the skills and the understanding and the knowledge that they need in order to be able to recognise and respond to their own worries and anxieties. That doesn't mean to say that as the adults around them that we completely melt away and drift away. It's really important that we're there to support and scaffold as appropriate. But if we're always right there doing it for them rather than with them and alongside, then actually it's going to be very, very difficult for them to manage in the longer term. So helping our teenagers to help themselves is a really important aspiration to have as our children become a little older and need to start becoming more independent. It also means that the strategies that we're using are more sustainable, can be used over time and applied in different settings as well. The first idea I want to share with you is about the importance of just being there for your teen if they're stressed, worried or anxious. Now, this is important because when we remain physically and emotionally present, so we're both in the room and in the room, we're listening, we're hearing, we're not running away or scared by their distress. When we stay there in the room with them, this creates a kind of safe base, a place to which they can return as they begin to experiment with different ways of managing their anxiety, different ideas for getting through. When we remain there, we provide the starting point from which they can begin to think about helping themselves. Particularly if you've been a very supportive parent, carer, other adult in a child's life before, the idea of them beginning to start taking steps to help themselves might feel a little bit daunting. And them knowing that you're here and you will remain here and you're going to be consistently there providing care and support if they really need it, will give them courage and strength to try new things. It's important that we remember here that we don't have to fix everything for the children in our care. We don't have to be able to make it all better in order to be able to be of great support to them. Often it's really important that we support teens to find ways forward for themselves, and some things it's not possible for us to fix at all. But just being there, remaining present, makes it much more possible for them to cope and go on to thrive. Just like with younger children, the little things are the big things. So when your teen decides they want to open up to you or they start exploring the issues that are on their mind, sometimes we might find that our adult brain kicks in and we think, well, why are they so worried about that? In particular, things like friendship issues can seem like a really big deal to our teenagers, and we might find ourselves thinking, well, this is just ridiculous. What your teen needs to know is that you're listening, that you understand that this matters to them, and remember that the things that seem little to us, they feel big to them. And if we create a safe space in which they can share them, explore them, learn from them, respond to them, then when genuinely big things come along that both they and we would agree were big, then you are the person and the place to which they'll come. They'll know they can rely on you for the big things if you're there for the little things. A key skill to master here is listening to understand. My grandma always told me I've got 2 ears and 1 mouth for a reason, and we should practice that when working with our teens. We've lived a lot longer. We've got a lot of ideas about how they could and should do things differently, but we also know in our heart of hearts they don't really want to hear those things. And often the only way they learn is through experiencing and trying things that they have decided to do for themselves. So the best thing often that you can do is listen. Be there, ask open-ended questions so that they can begin to explore how they're feeling and what they might do next, rather than always telling them. So less talking, more listening, and listening to understand. That is about not listening with a view to responding, jumping in, feeding back, but rather just being curious, genuinely intrigued by what it is they have to say and really listening to hear the meaning there. Being there and being present when a teen is distressed, anxious, worried can sometimes mean being there when they are not feeling their best selves, and they might need you to remind them that you love them, that your care for them is unconditional. And again, that's an important part of being there. A lot of this feels really obvious to us. Of course we'll always be there. Of course we'll always be by their side. Of course there's nothing that our child could ever say or do that would make us love them less. But we need to work on the assumption that they don't know this, and we need to say it out loud if they're to know. Finally, if your teen gets stuff wrong, things go wrong, they try something and it fails, try really hard if you can to just listen, to allow them to work through it, and avoid saying, "I told you so." There's a part of us that loves to be right, but actually for your teen it's not helpful to have that kind of response, and what they need here is your empathy rather than feeling that they have your judgment. It's usually safe to assume that other people will assume our worst thoughts unless we convey out loud our best thoughts. So assume that they're thinking the worst and make sure that you try to communicate the best. Let them know that okay, maybe this didn't go quite to plan, or perhaps they did the thing that perhaps you thought they shouldn't and it didn't work out, but that's okay. You're here, you're listening, you'll be by their side as they try again, try something new, as they dust themselves up and go again. Next, we're thinking about the importance of sleep. I love sleep. I'm a late convert to sleep, and now I'm a bit evangelical about it. The thing is that everything feels better when we've had a good sleep. And I'm sure that you can recognize this in yourself. So if you're here as a parent or carer of a teen, if you think back to when that teen was a wee bairn and perhaps you were having broken sleep chronically, remember how things felt? Everything was hard. Your problem solving went to put. You were really emotional. You might have been angry one minute and crying the next. And things just generally are harder when we're really, really tired. And again, we all benefit from a really good night's sleep. It's like hitting the reset button and suddenly the whole world feels like a slightly better place. Now, the tricky thing here is that for some reason, and there's a big societal change needed here, sleep isn't seen as particularly cool by our teens, and we need to help them to be motivated to prioritise sleep in their schedule. And in order to do this, it's important that we have some really open and honest discussions with them. It's helpful if they are able to understand why sleep is important, and you can go deep on the neuroscience if you want to, but a better way of doing it is often, I find, to help them learn by experience. So doing something really simple like having them mood journal for a few days and noticing how their mood is on days when they've had more sleep compared to how their mood is on days when they've had less sleep, and generally speaking, the evidence will speak for itself. There can be a danger when it comes to things like sleep where perhaps we recognise it would be good for our child, but they don't particularly want to spend more of their time sleeping when they could be gaming or doing other things. There can be a danger that we get this real disconnect between the generations, and so we need to think about how to approach this with curiosity and empathy, and maybe understand that I really get that actually your friends are on WhatsApp until 3 a.m. and you would really like to be part of those conversations and you've got fear of missing out. But let's explore why that might not always be optimal. And thinking together about this with curiosity and beginning to explore is a really helpful kind of way in. Your teen will have opinions and they will share them. And our job is to listen to those opinions and not try to prove our teen wrong, but rather just to kind of really go on with that mind of curiosity, asking questions, wondering what if. I wonder what would happen if you had an hour's more sleep tonight. Let's see. Maybe we experiment with that. And I think with lots of these things where we're looking to make changes with diet or sleep or exercise, if we make little changes and we actually stop and we notice what the impact is, that can be really motivating and can help teens to make decisions which are based on the science of the research they've done with themselves. And of course, they're not always going to choose to do the sensible things, because sometimes the other options are just too tantalizing, or they don't have the self-control, or they don't have the mechanisms in place in order to enable them to engage in healthier behaviors. But if they haven't explored this with a trusted adult, and they haven't been made aware of the different possibilities, and they don't have a concept of what healthy might look like, there's absolutely no way that they're going to achieve it by accident. So we need to open our minds to having these discussions, exploring with them, letting them begin to find their own way here, and reminding them that if things feel particularly difficult, maybe it's just worth trying getting one really good night's sleep and seeing how things feel in the morning. This is an important tip, particularly if you live in a household as well, where maybe things sometimes bubble over and that anxiety might turn to anger. That's fairly common. And sometimes when we are tired at the end of the day, that's more likely to happen for our teen, and it's more likely to happen for us. And a thing that we should always aim for here is, if in doubt, sleep. If we feel moods and tempers rising and flaring and we're worried that things might blow, actually trying to walk away from the situation, trying to bring a bit of calm and thinking about what might it look like in the morning, and just going to sleep and seeing how things change after that sleep is a really, really helpful thing to do. It can feel impossible in the moment, and it can be helpful to have had these discussions at a time of calm, that if this happens again next time, let's just agree to disagree and then come back and explore it in the morning. What you often find if you do that is that where you were tetchy and irritable the night before, and there was shouting and difficult stuff going on, in the morning maybe the problems are still there and the disagreement is still there, but we're able to have a reasoned discussion about it. So there's a debate rather than an argument that you might have had the evening before. There are some things that you can do and you can teach your teen to do to help with the sleep. So we might accept that they might not want to sleep longer, and that might be a longer term battle, but we can look with them at their sleep environment and just try to make sure that there's anything that we can do to help them to help themselves here. So in terms of tweaking that environment, that might be things like making sure the room is dark enough and cool enough, and that they have separate zones for work and leisure if possible. If we are using our bed for activity that's really stressful or exciting, it can make it much harder to go to sleep. So really, our bed should be a place of sleep and rest, not of one of work and play. And my final thought on sleep is, as ever, coming back to thinking about yourself as a sleep role model. So as parents, as carers, as adults in children's lives, we often have a good idea about what we think they should be doing, but when we are honest and we reflect on our own habits and behaviours, they're not necessarily optimal. So just have a think about your own sleep habits and whether these are things that you would want the teenager in your life to copy. And if not, why not? And what small changes might you be able to make? Perhaps you and your teen can make those changes together. The old adage is that a problem shared is a problem halved, and I'm a massive advocate of that idea. So one of our jobs as the adult in a teen's life is to help them find ways that feel okay to them of sharing those problems so that they can be halved. Sharing our problems doesn't always look like this. It's not always about talking to someone else. Sometimes it's about writing or drawing or otherwise creating. It's not important how we do it, but helping our teen to understand that when we share our problem and we put it out into the universe, suddenly that problem feels a little bit more manageable. It's out there, we've given it a name, we've created it into a thing, and once it's a thing we can tame. A really good starting point for discussion with your teenager here is to reflect on yourself and how you share your problems. So you might talk to them about who you talk to or what you do in terms of creativity. Do you perhaps write a journal, or do you like to draw or sing or paint or dance, or what are the ways that you get your feelings, your problems out when they're bubbling up inside? And if you don't have ways of doing that, maybe this is something you can explore together with your teen. It's not about expecting them to use the thing that works for you, but rather about role modelling to them that there are different ways of doing it and that you have found that this works for you and maybe something different will work for them. And you might explore with them the different things they might try. We often find with teenagers that actually being exposed to a whole range of different ways of doing things is super helpful, because we never quite know what's going to click. And so if we let them try different things, singing, painting, acting, dancing, drawing, whatever, then we might find that one of those things really does click and they found their thing, and that this really helps them. By exposing them to all those different things, they might find the one thing that feels possible. One thing I found with teenagers in particular is that writing can be really powerful, and that this is something that can make it possible for them to make sense of the things in their head. And writing might be about using a journal and a pen, and never underestimate the power of a beautiful journal and pen as a gift to your teenager. Having something lovely to write with, to work with, can make us much more motivated to get our thoughts out of our head and onto the paper. But equally, it might be that they use a tablet or a phone, or they text, or they type, or, it doesn't really matter how that's coming out. One thing that I was advised recently, which I think is a great idea, is the idea of a brain dump. So we take everything that's in our head and we just write completely freely in whatever way feels right for us. So whether that's with pen and paper or quill and ink or tapping on a keyboard, but we just write and we write and we write, and we do not edit and we do not allow ourselves to just pause and think, but rather we just get it all out. And when we do that, if you write for like 3, 4, 5 minutes solid, it's surprising what you'll find does come out, and how that can begin to help you to make sense of things a little bit. And also it just empties your head and clears a little bit of space. So that can be a really nice activity to try. If you do find that your teen begins to be able to express themselves in some way or another, it's okay if they want to keep that stuff to themselves. And particularly as our teens are getting a little bit older, we perhaps want to know what's going on with them. We want to be able to help them. We really care about them, but we need to be accepting of the fact that they will have their secrets. There will be things that they don't choose to share with us, and that's okay. And I think personally that it's quite important that teens know that we would respect their privacy, and so them being able to have stuff that's just for them, I think, is quite crucial to that. If they do choose to share some of what they've drawn, written, created, otherwise made with you, that is a real privilege and should be seen as such. We should acknowledge that. Thank you so much for trusting me with this, and acknowledge that this was a big thing, that they chose to trust in you, they chose to share that. And we need to be really, really careful about exploiting that trust. And again, be mindful of, if they've shown us something, told us something, that doesn't mean that they're happy for other people to know that, even if it's another really close family member, for example. Finally, when it comes to getting our problems out, I just have to say that dogs are really great listeners. In fact, I'm saying this, my dog is looking at me. Here's Buddy. Come on, Buddy, say hi. Dogs are really great listeners. So Buddy is my therapist currently. I've had lots of others, but he's the best. And he never judges about what I have to say. And if things feel tough, then we go for a walk, don't we? Oh, I said the W word. We go for a and then I chat with him. And he doesn't judge, and I get it out, and things feel better. So if you have a dog, then I would recommend that you suggest to your teen that they W the dog, so that they can have someone to chat to. They can do that chatting in their head if they feel weird about it, that's okay too. And if you don't have a dog, then maybe you have a neighbour who does. It's a very specific suggestion I'm making, but just one that I found to be really, really powerful, and certainly something that I do a lot with my own adolescent daughters. If things are feeling really tough, and there have been some tough times during lockdown, then often if we go for a walk with Buddy or our other dogs, suddenly everything begins to feel quite a lot better. In life, there are always some things that we can control and some things that are beyond our control. That's something that we have to grow comfortable with and we need to learn to accept. But a really helpful question for your teen can be, what are the things that you can control? And the jargon for this is, what's within your locus of control? What are the things that you can impact on, that you can change? So your teen might be worried about climate change, and maybe they can't change the whole of what's going on with the climate, but maybe they can change whether they choose to use plastic straws or reuse things, or, you know, there are things that they can control, many things that they can't. So zone in on the things that your teen can control. Help them to identify within any given day, week, month, what is within their control. This is really important for teenagers, particularly as they are growing and developing and wanting to become more independent. It can often feel like everything is controlled by other people, and beginning to hand the reins over of control is kind of crucial here too. So helping them to understand what they can control and thinking about if there's additional responsibility that they feel ready to take control of at this time. There are some things within life that we might look to control when everything else feels out of control, and as a parent or carer we might just want to keep a bit of a weather eye on those things. So things like our physical well-being. I think it's fantastic if a teenager decides to take control of their sleep or their diet or their exercise. To a certain extent, these are really, really positive things. When we might begin to worry is the point at which this thing begins to control them instead of them controlling it, and it crosses the line from a healthy thing to something which has become a bit of an obsession, or a bit of a form of self-harm. And that can be things like denying themselves of sleep purposefully. It might be things like becoming really perfectionist in their schoolwork and going again and again and again until it's perfect and having these really unrelenting standards. It might be things like really controlling what they eat, either restricting their intake or being very particular about food groups and so on, or it might be about controlling their exercise and making really kind of strict limits on themselves about what they're allowed to do. A couple of rules of thumb here about when to worry. So that first one is, when it feels like the thing is controlling your child rather than your child controlling the thing. So if it feels, it's controlling them. And the next is if they couldn't take a day off from the thing. So if the thing is exercise and you have a child who is engaging very heavily in exercise and you're not quite sure if you should be concerned or encouraging, because that line is often kind of blurred, I would be asking myself, if we were to go on holiday, would the first thing that my child do be thinking about how can they ensure that they still get their exercise on holiday? Or if the thing is food, then would they be thinking on someone's birthday that they couldn't possibly break their rules even for one day to have a slice of cake? And how do they judge themselves when they fail to do the thing in the way that they ascribe to themselves? So again, for example, if someone had food rules, then, great to take some control of what we're eating and to try to be healthy. But if they make a small slip up in their diet, then what do they do? Like, how do they feel about that? If they are really, really down on themselves and there's a lot of self-hate and negative talk and that's really disproportionate to what they've done, then again, I would be beginning to worry. But all that aside, thinking with your teen about what things within their life they can control can be really helpful. One of the things that one of my daughters has taken up relatively recently is bullet journaling. And it's interesting because she's 11 and there's not a lot in her life that really, really, really needs organising. But, in the course of the pandemic, a lot has felt out of control, and journaling really beautifully and creating a very, bullet journaling is basically like art meets daily planning. It's odd, but she loves it, and I get what the appeal is, and it helps her to feel in control of something, and it's harmless and it's quite a creative endeavour for her to engage in. So that for me is really, really positive. So thinking about what are the things that your teen can control, can you hand over some responsibility so they've got additional things within their life that they're responsible for, trusted for, that they feel in control of without feeling too much burden of responsibility, and how can you just keep a careful eye out just in case sometimes that control goes just a little bit too far. So in the last module, we were thinking about how we can enable teens to feel some control of some things. There are some things we can control, but then there's all these other things that we can't control, things we can't change, things we can't fix or impact on. And the question here is, how do we sit with the distress that might be causing? That might be causing anxiety, worry, stress, all sorts of difficult feelings. And it's really important that our teens learn to live with that distress. Now, there is a whole set of skills and a whole evidence base around distress tolerance. And so if this is something you want to learn more about, you need to look up distress tolerance, and it's a part of dialectical behaviour therapy. So this is skills-based therapy that helps people to sit with distress. And the idea is it helps to prevent things like self-harm and substance abuse and so on. But these basic distress tolerance skills, sitting with the things that we cannot control, are really helpful skills for everyone. Because for all of us, there are things sometimes that are beyond our control, and we need to find ways to live with that. A good first step is a simple acceptance of the fact that there are some things that we can't control, and we can begin to explore that, be curious about that with our teen. What are the things that we can control and what are the things that we can't? And just naming that, exploring it, acknowledging it is a really important first step. Even within a situation that might feel uncontrollable, we can look for the elements that we can control. So for example, we might think about the fact that we can control how we feel about the situation, even if we can't change the situation. So if we're feeling deeply frustrated, we can make a conscious decision that I'm not going to let this impact on my whole day. I'm going to control how I feel in response to this. I'm going to let it go. In particular, this can be helpful with teens who are facing things like friendship struggles and those kinds of really difficult, challenging things that happen here. So we might talk to them about, I can see that, you know, this argument's really, really bubbling and really frustrating you, but maybe we can think about doing some breathing or calming or relaxation strategies or walk the dog in order to try and change how you feel. And yes, they can't maybe change the situation with the friends, but they can change how they feel about it right now. And I think that's a really important thought generally. We can't always change things, but we can take steps to change how we feel. And we can use things here like our relaxation and breathing strategies. So when things feel difficult, then we can go into this kind of hyper state of adrenaline, our fight, flight, fright kind of response. And what we need in that instance, if we want to be able to feel differently, is to kind of trick our brain into calming down. So we might not be able to make the thing go away that is causing this response, but maybe we can calm how we feel. And we can do this by using things like really simple breathing exercises. And when we really slow down our breathing and we do something like the box breathing, which is where we breathe in for the count of 4, we hold for the count of 4, we breathe out for the count of 4, and we hold for the count of 4 again. And we do this again and again and again. And when we do this, then actually we find that our brain is tricked into feeling a little bit calmer, because our body is doing the calm thing, and it begins to say to our brain, it's okay, you think that you're frightened, but actually I'm quite calm. So we can talk our teen through this, we can teach them to do these strategies for themselves, and that can really begin to trick the brain when we need to. If there's something that we absolutely can't control, then we might also think about how we can distract ourselves. So rather than dwelling in on the thing that we cannot control, like the dog that keeps wanting to be in the video, for example, we can try to distract ourselves and do something that takes our mind away from that thing that's worrying us. If we can't change it, then actually what we need to do is change the record and try to think about something else instead. And here, any kind of activity that we might get completely lost in can be really helpful. This is where stuff like gaming or reading or doing something like knitting or playing piano, any kind of hobby or interest or passion that a young person has that they find really engages them and takes their mind away from ruminating on more difficult thoughts or circumstances can be really helpful. Finally, it can be helpful for a young person to learn kind of mindfulness techniques. And these are strategies where we're very much in the moment and we're embracing the moment and we're acknowledging the thoughts that are coming through our head, but we're just letting them sort of pass by. And when we're unable to change the circumstances around us or the way that things are, then this can allow us to just notice those thoughts and just let them go by, because we can't do anything about them. And that's not necessarily an easy thing to live with, but if we're able to be in that moment and try to find that state of calm and just notice those thoughts, that can be something that can really help. And there's huge amounts of evidence for the benefits of mindfulness. There's loads of different apps that can help with that. So things like the Calm app or the Headspace app are ones that young people very regularly tell me that they find really helpful when it comes to mindfulness. A really helpful thing that a teen can learn in order to help themselves if they're struggling with worry or anxiety is self-soothing. And this is just as simple as it sounds. It's about learning to soothe ourselves. Yes, that's right, buddy. It's quite simple. But we're not all necessarily very good at it. And the sooner that children and young people can learn these skills, then the more able they are to put them into action. Like any skills, the more that we practice these things, then the better we are at them. And the more we are able to put them into practice at times of particular need or distress. So our self-soothe strategies can be very wide-ranging, and there's no reason to kind of pigeonhole them into particular types of activities. It's really about what works for a particular child or young person. We should be open-minded and explore for them. Think about times when they have felt calm or happy and consider where they were, what they were doing and who they were with, and what we can learn from that and what we might be able to replicate. Things I find especially helpful to think about when considering what might be soothing for a young person, how they might self-soothe, include things like how we draw on the different senses. So we might be using things that smell particularly nice or that have an interesting touch or texture, or we might be listening to calming music, for example. There's all sorts of different things, and it's just about tapping into what works for the particular child or young person. I found that a particularly helpful thing to do can be to couple those self-soothe moments with anxiety-provoking moments. So if we're aware that there are particular moments, instances, times in the day when a teen might be feeling more anxious than at other times, that we might think particularly about how to couple that with a soothing, calming, relaxing moment. So an example that I've been using a lot at the moment, I'm filming this during the course of the pandemic, which feels like it's going on forever. We have been thinking about hand washing and how when we wash our hands, it sometimes gives that spike of anxiety because it reminds us about the pandemic and that this seems to be going on, and what if I haven't washed my hands well enough and what might happen, and there can be all these different thoughts going around in our head, and lots of thoughts about the things that we can't control. So hand washing can be a bit of a trigger for anxiety for many young people and old people too during the pandemic. So we've learned to couple that with a soothing thing, which would be massaging our hands, maybe using a nice hand lotion after we've washed our hands, and coupling the anxiety-provoking hand washing with a nice, calming, self-soothing hand massage. So you can think about other ways of coupling things, and often doing things like coupling calming music with anxiety-provoking situations can be really helpful here. A really nice activity to do with a young person is to create a self-soothe box, and this is just a box full of things that make them happy, calm, that they can use to soothe themselves. And it's as simple as finding a box, maybe a shoebox, covering it in pretty paper, decorating it however you want. That can be a really nice part of the activity, and you'll often find that discussion is generated whilst you're doing that. And you just fill the box with all sorts of things that will help you to find your calm or happy place. So you might fill it with things that feel nice or smell nice, stories that you used to enjoy reading. You might have headphones in there to prompt you to listen to calming music in this moment. It doesn't really matter what goes in there. It's very individualized, but it's your go-to place if you need a pick-me-up or a calm me down. I've mentioned music in passing a couple of times during this module, and I think it's really important to just note the power of music to help to flip the feeling when we are struggling with anxiety, and that working with our teenager, talking to them about music and what music does for them can be really helpful. And we might think with them about doing things like creating a calming or uplifting playlist that they might listen to when they're looking to change how they feel. So it might be that when they're beginning to feel quite anxious, that they listen to a playlist and it helps them to feel calm. And again, often we find that with teenagers, they're really keen to talk about the music that they like, and this can be a really nice way to bridge with them, to build connections and to have some good discussions. Listen to the music that they're interested in if they're happy to share it. This really shows kind of respect for them and their opinions, and you never know, you might find your new favourite artist in amongst their favourite artists currently. All of the different calming strategies are helpful for different people at different times, and I would always recommend trying out as many different things as you can, because you never know what will sit well, and also to practice any kind of calming, breathing, relaxation strategies at times of calm initially. If we practice at times of calm, then at times of distress and crisis we're able to draw on those skills and those practiced activities at a time when we really need them, when it really, really matters. Different thoughts are racing through our heads all the time, and some of them are good, some of them are bad, and some of them are indifferent. But one of the things that we can help our teens to do is to notice the negative thoughts and to begin to question them, and to become a little bit of what I would call a thought detective, in order to wonder, is this thought accurate and true? Is it being kind to myself? And do I need to keep thinking it? And this might all sound quite odd, but when we are anxious or worried or low, then we can often find that we fall into these thought distortions, cognitive distortions or thought traps, and that our thoughts can be very, very negative, and this can end up as quite a tricky cycle to get out of. And one of the main sort of pillars of treatment for anxiety is cognitive behavioural therapy, and that's basically a talking and doing therapy based on understanding our own thoughts and how they impact on our behaviour, and then actually trying to change our thoughts in order to then change our behaviour, which sounds kind of simple, I guess, but it can be quite tricky to do, and we have to really persevere. But the first thing is to notice the negative thoughts. For many people, they've had these negative thoughts going around and around in their head much of the time for a long time, and they don't even realise that it's anything unusual. So beginning to think our thoughts aloud, beginning to recognise when a teenager is being down on themselves unnecessarily and picking them up on that can be a really good starting point. Some of the thought traps or cognitive distortions that you might notice in your teen, or indeed in yourself, include mind reading. This is when we make assumptions about what other people are thinking about us based on nothing other than perhaps our own opinion of ourselves. Oh my word, he's looking at me because I'm so fat. Do you have any evidence that he's looking at you because you're so fat? Maybe his glance just happened to go in your direction. We often layer our thoughts, our intentions, our beliefs on other people's actions, and so we are reading their minds or attempting to. We need to really question whether we've got that right and whether it's healthy and helpful. Next is filtering, and this is as it sounds, we filter stuff out. But in this instance, when we're thinking about negative automatic thoughts or thought traps or cognitive distortions, filtering is when we focus in on the bad and we filter out the good. And so if, for example, I have been guilty of this many times, I might speak at an event and there might be 300 people present and they all fill out a feedback form and 299 of them say it was good or outstanding and they had a good time and it was helpful. One person might have had the worst time. It might have been the worst training they'd ever been on, and they write something really deeply critical on their feedback form. On a bad day, my cognitive distortions would be such that I filter out the 299 pieces of good and positive and maybe even glowing occasionally feedback, and instead I focus in on that one piece of bad feedback. And this happens for, well, many different reasons, but basically when we have beliefs about ourselves, we are driven to try and confirm those beliefs. That's a very human thing, and so we look for the one piece of evidence that backs us up and we dismiss everything else. And actually this can work in our favour if we're able to work on that and have more positive beliefs about ourselves, because we look for that, it's called confirmation bias, and we look for it in the positive rather than the negative. But what we need to do here is to recognise that we're doing this, to recognise that our teen is doing it and help them pick up on it and say, do you think that you're filtering out the good here and really zoning in on the bad? Finally, and there are loads of other thought traps, but I just thought I'd share 3 to get you started. Look them up: cognitive distortions, or thought traps, or negative automatic thoughts, are things you can Google to find out more about this. But the third one I was going to share today, so we've thought about mind reading, we thought about filtering, and now we're going to think about labeling. And this is basically when we give ourselves a label. We overgeneralize based on a tiny amount of information. So maybe I did a maths test today and I failed it, or didn't do so well as I might have hoped to. And so I would not say I failed a maths test today, but rather I'm a failure. And we would like generalize out to the whole of our life based on this one teeny tiny piece of evidence. We would make assumptions and label ourselves in the negative based on that. So mind reading, filtering, labeling, and many other of these kinds of negative thought cycles that we can fall into. The first step is to notice that they're happening. And when they're just happening inside our heads, often we just live with them all day, every day, and we kind of figure it's normal. We probably assume everyone else's head sounds like this too. And I bet at least some of you watching this course are suddenly thinking, oh, actually, that's my head too. I'm here for my teen, but in fact, my thoughts are like that. The first thing is to recognise it. Once we know that this is a potential issue, we can recognise it. Then what we look to do is to try and catch these thoughts as they are happening. So each time one of those negative thoughts comes along, we begin to question it and say, really, is that thought true? Is it grounded in evidence? And really helpfully often is, what would my best friend have to say about that? Or what would my parents say if I shared this thought with them? Would they agree? Finally, we learn to challenge those thoughts and we question, is there a different way of approaching this? Could I think about this in a different way? At the beginning, you might be doing this for your teen. You might be catching them having these thoughts out loud sometimes. I'm so stupid, I'm so fat, I'm a complete failure. You might hear these thoughts out loud, and we need to notice them and name them if we feel confident doing that, and challenge them. But over time, if we do this alongside our teen, then hopefully they learn to begin to recognize those thoughts for themselves and challenge them for themselves. I'm a massive believer in anxiety hacks, so little things that we can do every day to help us to manage anxiety a little bit better. I'm a big believer in these things because I live with a lot of anxiety and it can be really impactful on my life, and I found that there are little things that I can do that make a really big difference in my ability to cope day to day. And one of my favourite anxiety hacks at the moment is to talk to myself like I would talk to my dog. So Buddy here is perfect and wonderful and lovely in every way. And I would never, ever think to talk to him cruelly, to be unkind, to say mean things about him, or be otherwise, oh, I just couldn't bear it. He's lovely and I'm always nice to him and I'm always kind to him. And if I could exercise that same kindness to myself, then life is just a little bit better. Now, when we are anxious or worried or low, we're often pretty nasty to ourselves. I have to say, it's something I notice particularly when I'm filming. So if I have misspoken in a take on this film, when I watch the film back and I see how mean I am to myself, it really makes me stop and think, I'm vicious to myself. It's horrible. I would never ever speak to someone else that way. So when I find myself doing that, and if your teen finds themselves doing that, we just need to stop and say, why is it okay to be so unkind to ourselves? Why do we have such unrelenting standards of ourselves? Why do we pick on the tiniest little things and really exaggerate them and just be so niggly and cruel? We can be really, really horrible to ourselves, and it makes life just that much worse. So yeah, my hack is talk to ourselves like we would talk to our dog. Or if you don't have a dog or you hate dogs, then talk to ourselves like we would talk to our best friend. When we are kind to ourselves, when we exercise that compassion and kindness that we would exercise when talking to or being with someone that we really care about, then actually we make everything just a little bit better. Thank you so much for watching this course on anxiety in teens and how you can support your teenager to support themselves. I hope there were some ideas in here that you found helpful. Remember, it's not just about knowing the information that matters, it's about what you do next with it that really counts. So have a bit of a think about 1 or 2 practical takeaways and how you might do things a little bit differently today or tomorrow as a result of what you've learnt. You don't need to do all the things in the course. The idea really is to give you a range of ideas, so you might pick 1 or 2 that are a really good fit for you. Be kind to yourself. You won't get it right all the time, and I think it's really important to acknowledge from the off that we are all human and we can't be heroes every day. We need to be human in our approach. So just be human in your approach. Try new things. You'll get it wrong sometimes, and remember, even when you get things wrong, you're still role modelling in your response to that wrongness and how you might fix and repair the ruptures that happen. Try it out, see how you get on, and good luck. Being a teenager is pretty tough, and if your teenager has someone walking alongside them who cares enough to have got to the very end of this course, they are lucky, lucky, lucky indeed, and their prospects are good. So much better than you might think.